Marcus Chen had been on the Galactic Academy station for exactly 3 months when the prank happened. The massive orbital facility housed cadets from over 200 different species, all training to become officers in the United Galactic Fleet. As the only human among thousands of aliens, Marcus had grown used to being the center of attention, though not always the good kind. The Academy's cafeteria buzzed with the usual mix of languages, clicking sounds and electronic translations. Marcus sat alone at his usual table, picking at something that resembled pasta but tasted like metal shavings. That's when they approached him. Zextar, a 7-foot-tall reptilian from the Saurian Empire, led the group. His scales gleamed under the artificial lighting, and his yellow eyes held that familiar look of amusement that Marcus had learned to dread. Behind him stood 3 other cadets, a crystalline being that sparkled like living diamond, a floating jellyfish-like creature with tentacles that sparked with electricity, and a mantis-like insectoid whose compound eyes reflected the room in thousands of tiny fragments. "Human," Zextar said, his voice carrying the typical arrogance of someone who belonged to one of the galaxy's most powerful military races. "We have heard stories about your species and your primitive weapons." Marcus looked up from his meal, already knowing this wouldn't end well. "What kind of stories?" The crystalline being chimed in, its voice like wind through glass caves. "Tales of warriors who fought with metal blades before discovering energy weapons." "How quaint." "Primitive doesn't even begin to describe it," the jellyfish creature added, its tentacles dancing with small electrical discharges. "Fighting with chunks of refined ore when the rest of the galaxy had moved beyond such barbarism millennia ago." Marcus felt his jaw tighten but said nothing. He'd learned that arguing only made things worse. The other species at the Academy came from civilizations that had been spacefaring for thousands of years. Humans had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, after first contact with a Saurian exploration vessel. They were the newest, most primitive members of the United Galactic Fleet. Zextar reached into a bag he'd been carrying and pulled out something that made the entire table fall silent. It was a sword, but not like anything Marcus had seen in the Academy's weapons training. This blade was made of wood, carved from what looked like oak with a simple crossguard and wrapped handle. It was beautiful in its simplicity, but completely useless as an actual weapon. "We thought you might appreciate this," Zextar said, placing the wooden sword on the table with exaggerated ceremony, "a weapon more suited to your species' level of development. Perhaps you can use it in combat training instead of those advanced plasma weapons you clearly don't understand." The surrounding tables had grown quiet, alien faces turning to watch the spectacle. Marcus could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on him, waiting to see how the primitive human would react to this public humiliation. "We had it specially crafted by the station's fabricators," the mantis being clicked, its mandibles moving in what Marcus had learned was their version of laughter. "Real Earth wood imported at considerable expense. Consider it a gift from your more advanced classmates." Marcus stared at the wooden sword, his mind racing. He could feel the anger building in his chest, the familiar burn of humiliation that came with being the constant target of jokes about human inferiority. Every day brought new reminders that his species was considered backward, primitive, barely worthy of inclusion in galactic society. But as he looked at the sword, something else stirred within him. The craftsmanship was actually remarkable. Someone had taken care to carve this properly, with attention to balance and detail. The wood was smooth and well finished, the grip perfectly sized for human hands. It might be a joke to them, but it was still a beautiful piece of work. "Thank you," Marcus said finally, his voice calm despite the storm of emotions inside him. Zextar blinked in surprise. "You're thanking us?" "It's a thoughtful gift," Marcus replied, picking up the wooden sword and feeling its weight. It was lighter than the plasma swords they used in training, but there was something satisfying about its solid presence in his hands. "I appreciate the time and effort that went into making this." The aliens exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the reaction they'd expected. They had wanted anger, embarrassment, maybe tears. Instead, the human was treating their prank as if it were a genuine gesture of friendship. "You do realize it's made of wood, don't you?" The crystalline being asked. "It cannot cut through armor, cannot block energy weapons, cannot do anything useful in actual combat." Marcus nodded. "I understand what it is. Then why are you not insulted?" Zextar demanded, his yellow eyes narrowing. This is a weapon for children, for primitive beings who know nothing of real warfare. Marcus stood up, the wooden sword still in his hand. Around him, the cafeteria had gone completely silent. Every conversation stopped as aliens watched this strange interaction between the human and his tormentors. "Because," Marcus said, meeting Zexitar's gaze directly, "you've just given me exactly what I need to prove something very important." "And what might that be?" the jellyfish creature asked, its tentacles curling with curiosity. Marcus smiled, an expression that made several nearby aliens take a step back. There was something in that smile that spoke of hidden depths, of secrets that the galaxy had yet to discover about humanity. "That the weapon doesn't make the warrior," Marcus said. "The warrior makes the weapon." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a table of confused aliens and a cafeteria full of whispered conversations. In his hand, the wooden sword felt perfectly balanced, as if it had been waiting its entire existence for this moment. None of them could have known that Marcus Chen had spent his childhood studying traditional martial arts, that his grandfather had been a master swordsman, who had taught him that true skill transcended the tool. None of them realized that by giving him this wooden sword, they had just handed him the perfect opportunity to demonstrate why humans had earned their place among the stars despite their late arrival to the galactic stage. The Academy's combat trials were only 2 weeks away, and Marcus had just decided exactly how he was going to participate. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the Academy's training complex before dawn. The massive facility contained dozens of combat simulators, sparring arenas, and weapons ranges designed to accommodate the vastly different fighting styles of the galaxy's many species. At this early hour, the halls were nearly empty, which was exactly what Marcus wanted. He made his way to Training Room 7, a basic sparring chamber equipped with holographic opponents and impact sensors. The wooden sword felt comfortable in his grip as he activated the room's systems. The walls hummed to life, projecting a simple training environment around him. "Computer, load basic humanoid combat simulation, difficulty level 1, Marcus said. A shimmering figure appeared before him, roughly human-sized but generic in appearance. It held a standard training blade, the kind used by most Academy cadets. The hologram waited for Marcus to signal he was ready. Marcus took a deep breath and fell into the stance his grandfather had taught him years ago. Feet shoulder-width apart, weight evenly distributed, wooden sword held in a middle guard position. The movements came back to him like muscle memory, even after years of using advanced plasma weapons. "Begin simulation," he commanded. The holographic opponent attacked immediately, its blade cutting through the air in a standard Academy thrust. Marcus sidestepped smoothly, his wooden sword sweeping up to deflect the attack before flowing into a counterattack aimed at the hologram's midsection. The impact sensors registered a solid hit. "Simulation opponent defeated," the computer announced. "Reset for next engagement?" "Increase difficulty to level 3, Marcus said. The next hologram moved faster, its attacks more sophisticated. Marcus found himself working harder, but the wooden sword responded beautifully to his commands. Where plasma weapons required careful energy management and specific grip techniques, the wooden blade simply did what he asked of it. It was intuitive in a way that the high-tech weapons had never been. For the next hour, Marcus worked his way through increasingly difficult simulations. His grandfather's training had included not just traditional Earth swordsmanship, but adapted techniques from various historical fighting styles. The old man had been obsessed with the idea that true martial arts transcended cultural boundaries, that the principles of combat were universal. "The blade is just an extension of your will," his grandfather had often said. "Master yourself and you master any weapon." As Marcus fought, those words echoed in his mind. Each victory against the holographic opponents felt like rediscovering a part of himself that had been buried under months of struggling with alien technology and fighting techniques. Well, look what we have here." Marcus spun around to find Zexitar standing in the doorway, his yellow eyes gleaming with amusement. Behind him stood several other cadets, including the 3 from yesterday's incident. "The human is playing with his toy," Zexitar continued, stepping into the training room. "How adorable." Marcus lowered his wooden sword but didn't put it away. "Just getting some practice in." "Practice?" The mantis being clicked its mandibles. "What could you possibly be practicing?" "Chopping firewood?" The small crowd of aliens laughed, but Marcus noticed something different in their expressions. Yesterday they had looked at him with simple contempt. Now there was curiosity mixed with their amusement, as if they weren't quite sure what to make of him. "Computer, display training results for the last session," Marcus said calmly. The room's holographic display activated, showing a detailed breakdown of his performance. The aliens fell silent as they read the statistics. In 1 hour, Marcus had defeated opponents at difficulty levels up to 7, with an average engagement time of 32 seconds. For comparison, most cadets struggled with level 5 opponents. "Impossible," the crystalline being chimed. "The computer must be malfunctioning. No primitive weapon could achieve these results." "Computer, verify accuracy of displayed data," Zextar commanded. "All data is accurate," the computer responded. "Training results reflect actual performance against regulation combat simulations." The silence stretched uncomfortably as the aliens tried to process what they were seeing. Marcus had not only succeeded with his wooden sword, he had excelled beyond what most of them could accomplish with their advanced weapons. "The simulations are clearly too easy," Zextar said finally. "Holographic opponents are nothing like real combat," Marcus nodded. "You're right. Holographic opponents don't fight back with real intent. They don't adapt or learn during combat." "Exactly," Zextar said, though he looked suspicious of Marcus's agreement. "That's why I've decided to enter the Academy combat trials," Marcus continued. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Several aliens made sounds of surprise or disbelief. The combat trials were the Academy's premier martial competition, held annually to determine the finest warriors among the cadet corps. Winners earned immediate advancement to officer rank and choice assignments throughout the galaxy. "You cannot be serious," the jellyfish creature said, its tentacles writhing with agitation. "The trials are for real warriors, not humans playing with wooden sticks." "The rules don't specify what type of weapon participants must use," Marcus replied. "Only that they must be Academy-approved training implements." Zextar's eyes narrowed. "And you think that piece of carved wood qualifies?" Marcus smiled. "Computer, verify Academy regulation compliance for this training implement." There was a brief pause before the computer responded. "Training implement meets all Academy safety standards and regulations. Classification: non-energy melee weapon, Category 7, suitable for sanctioned competition." The aliens exchanged worried glances. What had started as a simple prank was spiraling into something none of them had anticipated. The human was actually going to fight in the Academy's most prestigious competition with a wooden sword. "Even if you're allowed to compete," Zextar said, "you'll be facing the best fighters from every species in the galaxy. The current champion is Korth Blackscale, undefeated for 3 years running. He's killed actual enemies in real combat." Marcus had heard of Korth Blackscale. The Saurian warrior was a legend at the Academy, known for his brutal efficiency and complete dominance in combat. He fought with twin plasma blades and had never been seriously challenged in any tournament. "I understand the risks," Marcus said. "You understand nothing," Zextar snapped. "You will embarrass yourself, your species, and everyone who has to watch you get torn apart by real warriors." Marcus hefted the wooden sword, feeling its familiar weight. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll show this galaxy something it hasn't seen before." "And what might that be?" the crystalline being asked. Marcus met each of their gazes in turn, his expression calm but determined. "What happens when someone who has nothing to lose faces someone who has everything to prove?" With that, he walked past them toward the exit. As he reached the doorway, he paused and looked back. "Registration for the combat trials opens tomorrow. I'll see you there." The aliens watched him go, their earlier amusement replaced by something that might have been concern. None of them had expected this reaction to their prank. They had wanted to humiliate the human, to put him in his place and remind him of his species' inferiority. Instead, they had apparently created a monster. News of Marcus's intention to compete in the Academy combat trials spread through the station like wildfire. Within hours, every cadet, instructor, and staff member had heard about the human who planned to fight the galaxy's best warriors with a wooden sword. The reactions varied wildly depending on the species. The Saurians found it insulting, viewing Marcus's participation as a mockery of their sacred combat traditions. The crystalline Zephyrians calculated the odds of his survival at approximately 0.03%. The energy-based Valari simply couldn't comprehend why any sentient being would choose such an obviously inferior weapon. But not everyone was dismissive. Marcus discovered this when he entered the Academy's library later that day and found Professor Thelnara waiting for him. The elderly Mysari was one of the few instructors who had shown Marcus any genuine respect since his arrival. Her species resembled tall, graceful humanoids with iridescent skin that shifted colors with their emotions. Right now, her skin showed the deep blue of curiosity mixed with the golden yellow of concern. "Marcus Chen," she said in her melodious voice, "I have been hearing most interesting rumors about your intentions." Marcus nodded, clutching his wooden sword. He had been carrying it everywhere since receiving it, partly out of practicality but mostly because it seemed to unnerve the other cadets. "Professor Thelnara, I assume you're here to try to talk me out of competing." "On the contrary," she said, her skin shifting to the silver of surprise. "I am here to offer assistance," Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry." Professor Thelnara gestured for him to sit at one of the library's study tables. Around them, towering shelves contained the collected knowledge of hundreds of civilizations, stored in formats ranging from traditional books to crystallized data matrices to floating energy patterns. "In my years teaching at this academy," she began, "I have observed a troubling trend. Our students become so dependent on technology, on energy weapons and computer-assisted targeting, that they forget the fundamental principles of combat. They mistake the tool for the skill." Marcus leaned forward, intrigued. "You don't think I'm making a mistake?" "I think you are about to remind this galaxy of something very important," she said, her skin now showing the warm orange of approval. "The Mysari have ancient texts that speak of warriors who achieved mastery through simplicity, who found strength in what others saw as weakness." She stood and walked to one of the nearby shelves, her long fingers dancing across the spines of various data storage devices until she found what she was looking for. It was an old-fashioned book, bound in what looked like leather but shimmered with an otherworldly quality. "This contains combat philosophies from over 50 different species," she said, placing the book before Marcus. "Many of them developed during the early spacefaring period, when weapons were simpler and victory depended more on skill than technology." Marcus opened the book carefully. The pages were filled with diagrams, techniques, and writings in multiple languages, all focused on fundamental combat principles that transcended specific weapons or fighting styles. "Why are you helping me?" Marcus asked. Professor Thelnara's skin shifted to the deep purple of memory. "Because 50 years ago, when your species first joined the galactic community, I was part of the delegation that visited Earth. I watched your people demonstrate their martial arts, their weapon techniques, their understanding of combat as both art and science. I have never forgotten what I saw there." She paused, her colors cycling through several emotions before settling on the gold of determination. "Your species approaches combat differently than any other in the galaxy," she continued. "Where others see weapons as tools of destruction, humans see them as extensions of the spirit. Where others focus on the technology, humans focus on the warrior using it. This galaxy has forgotten these truths, and I believe you are here to remind us." Marcus felt a weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. What had started as a response to a cruel prank was becoming something much larger. "There is something else," Professor Thelnara said. "I have been reviewing the Academy's records, and I discovered something interesting about your family history." She activated a holographic display that showed Marcus's Academy file. Most of it was standard information, but she highlighted a section he had never noticed before. "Your grandfather, Liu Chen, was apparently more than just a martial arts instructor," she said. "According to these records, he was one of the humans who participated in the early cultural exchange programs with the Galactic Federation. He studied combat techniques from 12 different species and developed what he called universal fighting principles." Marcus stared at the display in shock. His grandfather had never mentioned this. He had known the old man was knowledgeable about martial arts, but this suggested a much deeper level of expertise in galactic awareness. "He submitted a complete dissertation to the Federation's Cultural Archive," Professor Thelnara continued. "It has been gathering digital dust for decades, but I believe it contains knowledge that could help you in the trials." She transferred the file to a portable data device and handed it to Marcus. "Your grandfather understood something that most of the galaxy has forgotten. Combat is not about the weapon you carry, but about the spirit you bring to the fight. As Marcus left the library, his mind was spinning with new possibilities. The wooden sword in his hand felt different now. Not like a joke gift, but like a connection to something larger. His grandfather had been preparing him for this moment his entire life, even if neither of them had known it at the time. The academy's corridors buzzed with conversations about the upcoming trials. Marcus caught fragments of discussion as he passed groups of cadets. The human has lost his mind. Wooden sword against plasma. Weapons, Korth Blackscale will tear him apart. I heard he defeated Level 7 training simulations, impossible. With primitive weapons. Marcus ignored the chatter and made his way to his quarters. He had 2 weeks to prepare for the trials. 2 weeks to honor his grandfather's legacy and prove that humans belonged among the stars not despite their differences, but because of them. As he entered his room, he found a message waiting on his personal communicator. It was from his parents back on Earth, who had somehow heard about his plans despite the vast distance. Marcus, his mother's recorded voice said, "We heard about what you're planning to do. We wanted you to know that your grandfather left something for you before he died. We never thought you'd need it, but apparently he was wiser than we knew." The message included a file transfer containing hours of video recordings. Marcus's grandfather appeared on the screen, looking exactly as Marcus remembered him, but somehow more serious, more purposeful. "If you are watching this, my grandson," the old man's recorded voice said, "then the time has come for you to understand what I have truly been teaching you all these years. The galaxy is vast and full of wonders, but it has forgotten some important truths about the nature of combat and the spirit of the warrior." Marcus settled in to watch, the wooden sword across his knees, ready to learn secrets that had been waiting decades for this moment. Marcus spent the next 3 days immersed in his grandfather's hidden teachings. The recordings revealed a side of Liu Chen that Marcus had never known existed, the kindly old man who had taught him basic sword forms and meditation techniques, had actually been one of Earth's foremost experts on interspecies combat philosophy. "The galaxy believes that advancement means complexity," his grandfather said in one recording, demonstrating a series of movements with a simple wooden practice sword. "They think that energy weapons and computer-assisted targeting represent evolution in combat. They are wrong." The old man moved through the forms with fluid grace, each motion precise and purposeful. What looked like simple sword exercises were actually sophisticated combat techniques adapted from fighting styles across multiple star systems. True advancement comes from understanding the fundamental principles that govern all combat, regardless of species or technology. Speed, timing, distance, intention. These things do not change whether you fight with a stick or a starship. Marcus practiced along with the recordings, his own wooden sword tracing the same patterns his grandfather had performed decades ago. Gradually, he began to understand the deeper lessons hidden within each movement. What he had learned as traditional Earth martial arts were actually hybrid techniques that incorporated alien fighting concepts. The Saurians rely too heavily on their natural strength and regenerative abilities. His grandfather explained in another session, they fight as if they expect to take damage and heal from it. This makes them aggressive but also predictable. A smaller, faster opponent can exploit this by never being where the Saurian expects them to be. The recordings covered dozens of species analyzing their fighting styles, psychological approaches to combat, and inherent weaknesses, but more than that, they showed how a human fighter could adapt and respond to each type of opponent. The Zephyrians fight with mathematical precision, Liu Chen demonstrated, his wooden sword moving in complex geometric patterns. They calculate angles and probabilities, seeking the optimal strike. But mathematics cannot account for intuition, for the irrational leap that transcends logic. This is humanity's advantage. On the 4th day, Marcus was deep in practice when his door chimed. He opened it to find an unexpected visitor. Korth Blackscale himself, the Academy's reigning combat champion. The Saurian was even more impressive in person than Marcus had imagined. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, his dark scales rippled with muscle, and his golden eyes held the confident gaze of someone who had never met an equal opponent. Twin plasma. Blades hung at his sides, their energy cores glowing softly even when deactivated. "Human," Korth said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. I have come to speak with you. Marcus stepped aside to let the massive alien into his quarters. Korth's presence filled the small room, making everything seem smaller and more fragile by comparison. I have been hearing interesting stories about you, Korth continued, his gaze falling on the wooden sword leaning against Marcus's desk. They say you plan to face me in the trials with that primitive weapon. That's the plan, Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Korth picked up the wooden sword, examining it with the expertise of a seasoned warrior. Despite his size, his movements were surprisingly gentle and precise. It is well crafted, he admitted. Good balance, proper weight distribution. But wood, human, wood against plasma. Do you understand what that means? Marcus nodded. It means I'll have to be faster than you. To Marcus's surprise, Korth laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound that contained no mockery, only genuine amusement. You have courage, the Saurian said. Foolish courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless. I respect this. He set the wooden sword down carefully and turned to face Marcus directly. I have been champion of these trials for 3 years, Korth said. In that time, I have faced opponents from 47 different species. I have learned their techniques, adapted to their fighting styles, overcome their advantages. Some have come close to defeating me, but none have succeeded. What are you trying to tell me? Marcus asked. I am telling you that I will not hold back simply because you choose to fight with a disadvantage, Korth replied. In the arena, you will face the same warrior who has defeated every other challenger. I offer no mercy to any opponent, regardless of their weapon or their species. Marcus met the Saurian's golden gaze without flinching. I wouldn't want it any other way. Korth studied him for a long moment, then nodded approvingly. There is something else, the champion said. I have been watching the other cadets' reactions to your decision. Many see it as a joke, others as an insult to the traditions of combat. But some see it as something else. What do you mean? Hope? Korth said simply. There are those who have grown tired of the endless escalation of weapons technology, who wonder if we have lost something important in our pursuit of more powerful tools. They see you as a reminder that the warrior matters more than the weapon. The Saurian moved toward the door, then paused. I will defeat you in the trials, he said matter-of-factly. This is not arrogance, merely experience. But I find myself curious to see how you will fight, what you will show us before you fall. After Korth left, Marcus returned to his grandfather's recordings with renewed determination. The champion's visit had clarified something important. This was no longer about proving himself to the aliens who had mocked him. This was about representing something larger, a philosophy of combat that the galaxy had forgotten. The final lesson, his grandfather said in the last recording, is the most important. You must understand that victory and defeat are not the only possible outcomes of combat. Sometimes, the greatest victory comes from how you choose to lose. The old man smiled directly into the camera, as if he could see across time to this exact moment. If you are watching this, then you are facing an impossible challenge with inadequate tools. This is the human condition, grandson. We have always faced the impossible with whatever we had at hand, and somehow found a way to succeed. Not through superior technology or natural advantages, but through stubbornness, creativity, and an absolute refusal to accept that something cannot be done. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes as his grandfather's image continued. The wooden sword they have given you is not a limitation. It is an opportunity to show the galaxy what humans truly are. We are the species that looks at an impossible situation and asks not, how can this be done? But how can we do this differently? The recording ended, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and his wooden sword. Outside his window, the Academy's training complex was alive with activity as cadets prepared for the trials. In 9 days, he would face the greatest challenge of his life. But for the first time since receiving the wooden sword, Marcus felt truly ready. The day of the Academy combat trials dawned with unusual fanfare. News of the human with the wooden sword had spread beyond the Academy, drawing attention from across the galactic community. Representatives from major news networks, military officials, and even diplomatic observers had arrived to witness what many expected to be either a historic upset or a spectacular failure. The trials were held in the Academy's grand arena, a massive amphitheater that could accommodate spectators from dozens of different species. Atmospheric controls maintained perfect environmental conditions for everyone present, while holographic displays provided multiple viewing angles and real-time combat analysis. Marcus stood in the competitors' preparation area, wooden sword in hand, surrounded by 63 other cadets representing the finest warriors from every major species in the galaxy. The contrast was stark, where others carried gleaming plasma weapons, molecular disruptors, and energy shields. Marcus held a piece of carved wood. "Still time to withdraw," Zextar said as he passed, his twin plasma blades humming with contained energy. "Save yourself the embarrassment." Marcus ignored him, focusing instead on the meditation techniques his grandfather had taught him. Around him, competitors went through their pre-combat rituals. Some performed complex weapon checks, others chanted in alien languages, and a few engaged in intimidating displays of their species' natural abilities. The tournament structure was straightforward. Single elimination bracket, with matches continuing until only one fighter remained. The early rounds would determine who was worthy to face Korth Blackscale in the final match. "Competitors, prepare for the opening ceremony," announced the arena's voice system. They were led out into the arena proper, where the roar of the crowd was deafening. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the stands, their excitement palpable. Holographic displays showed close-ups of each competitor, and Marcus noticed the crowd's reaction when his image appeared alongside his wooden sword. Some laughed, others looked confused, but many leaned forward with genuine curiosity. Admiral Vex Thule, the Academy's commandant, stepped forward to address the crowd. The ancient Saurian's voice carried easily through the arena's acoustic systems. "Today, we witness the continuation of a tradition that spans millennia," he began. "Combat trial by single combat, where skill and courage determine the victor. These 64 competitors represent the finest warriors their species have to offer." The Admiral's gaze found Marcus in the lineup, and for a moment their eyes met. "Let it be remembered that victory comes not from the weapon wielded, but from the spirit that wields it. May the best warrior prevail." The first-round pairings were announced, and Marcus felt his heart skip as his name was called. His opponent would be Threxmore, a heavily armored insectoid warrior from the Hive Confederation. The creature stood 7 feet tall, covered in natural chitinous plates that could deflect most energy weapons, with 4 arms that allowed it to wield multiple weapons simultaneously. As the competitors dispersed to prepare for their individual matches, Marcus found a quiet corner to center himself. He closed his eyes and recalled his grandfather's words about fighting larger, more heavily armed opponents. "Size and armor create confidence," the old man had said. "Confidence creates patterns. Patterns create predictability, and predictability creates opportunity." Marcus's match was scheduled for the third fight of the day. He watched the first 2 battles from the waiting area, studying the fighters' techniques and the crowd's reactions. The first match ended quickly when a Zephyrian crystal warrior shattered his opponent's weapon with a precisely calculated strike. The second was a brutal affair between 2 Saurian warriors that left both bloodied, but declared one the victor. "Chen, Marcus. Threxmore, report to Arena Center," the announcement echoed through the preparation area. Marcus stood, wooden sword in hand, and walked toward his destiny. The crowd's noise grew louder as he entered the arena, and he could hear fragments of commentary from the viewing. Area's unprecedented situation, primitive, weapon against modern armor, betting, odds heavily favor. Threxmore was already waiting in the center of the arena, its forearms holding 2 plasma blades and 2 energy shields. The creature's compound eyes tracked Marcus's approach, its mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement or threat. "Human," Threxmore buzzed in its translated voice. "I will make this quick for you. Your weapon cannot penetrate my natural armor, cannot block my energy weapons. Surrender now and save yourself injury." Marcus took his position opposite the insectoid, wooden sword held in a middle guard stance that his grandfather had drilled into him thousands of times. "I appreciate the offer," Marcus replied, "but I think I'll see how this plays out." The referee, a floating energy being from the Astral Confederation, positioned itself between them. "Combatants ready," it announced, its voice resonating through the arena. Combat trial rules in effect. Victory by submission, incapacitation, or knockout. Lethal force is prohibited. Medical intervention available immediately upon conclusion. Marcus felt the familiar calm that came before action, the same feeling he'd experienced in countless training sessions with his grandfather. Time seemed to slow as his mind processed the situation. Larger opponent, superior reach, better armor, more weapons. By every conventional measure, he was outmatched, but convention was exactly what his grandfather had taught him to ignore. "Begin combat," the referee announced. Threxmore charged immediately, exactly as Marcus had expected. The insectoid's confidence in its armor made it aggressive, willing to trade hits because it believed its opponent couldn't hurt it. Two plasma blades cut through the air toward Marcus, while the energy shields moved to block any possible counterattack. Marcus didn't try to block or parry. Instead, he moved. He flowed to his left, the wooden sword tracing a complex pattern through the air that deflected one plasma blade, while his body twisted away from the second. Threxmore's momentum carried it past Marcus's position, and for a split second, the creature was off balance. Marcus's wooden sword struck like lightning, not at the armored sections of Threxmore's body, but at the joints between the chitinous plates. The point found the gap at the creature's knee, and while the wood couldn't penetrate the armor, the impact sent a shockwave through the joint that made Threxmore stumble. The crowd fell silent. The human had not only survived the first exchange, he had managed to land a hit on his seemingly invulnerable opponent. Threxmore spun around, its forearms moving in a complex defensive pattern as it reassessed its opponent. Marcus could see confusion in the creature's compound eyes. This wasn't how the fight was supposed to go. "Impossible," Threxmore buzzed. "Wood cannot harm the hive armor." Marcus smiled, settling back into his fighting stance. "You're right. It can't, but it doesn't have to." The real fight was just beginning. The fight with Threxmore became a masterclass in unconventional combat. While the insectoid relied on brute force and superior equipment, Marcus danced around his opponent like water flowing around stone. Every attack was avoided rather than blocked. Every counterattack targeted the gaps in armor and confidence rather than attempting to overpower. For 10 minutes, the arena watched in stunned silence as the human with the wooden sword systematically dismantled his opponent's strategy. Marcus struck at joints, at the spaces between armor plates, at the creature's balance and momentum. Each hit was precisely placed to disrupt rather than damage, to unbalance rather than injure. Finally, Threxmore made a critical error. Frustrated by its inability to land a decisive blow, the creature overextended with all four weapons simultaneously, leaving its center completely exposed. Marcus stepped inside the attack, his wooden sword striking a nerve cluster at the base of the creature's neck with surgical precision. Threxmore collapsed instantly, its nervous system temporarily overwhelmed by the perfectly placed strike. The arena erupted in chaos as spectators tried to process what they had just witnessed. "Victory to Chen Marcus," the referee announced, its voice barely audible over the crowd's roar. Marcus helped Threxmore to its feet as the creature regained consciousness. The insectoid stared at him with newfound respect. "How?" Threxmore asked simply. "My grandfather taught me that every defense has a weakness," Marcus replied. "You just have to be patient enough to find it." News of Marcus's victory spread through the academy like wildfire. By the time he returned to the preparation area, every other competitor was watching him with new eyes. The joke had become a genuine threat. The subsequent rounds followed a similar pattern. Marcus faced a series of increasingly skilled opponents, each confident that their advanced weapons and natural abilities would easily overcome a human with a wooden sword. A plasma-wielding Zephyrian discovered that precision meant nothing if your opponent refused to be where your calculations predicted. A shape-shifting morpher found that its advantage disappeared when facing someone who fought by feel rather than sight. With each victory, Marcus's legend grew. Betting odds shifted dramatically as spectators began to believe that the impossible might actually happen. The human was advancing through the tournament bracket with a consistency that defied all conventional wisdom. But his greatest test came in the semi-final match against Zextar himself, the Saurian who had started this whole affair by giving Marcus the wooden sword now faced him across the arena floor, twin plasma blades crackling with deadly energy. Zextar's yellow eyes burned with a mixture of anger and determination. "This ends here, human," Zextar growled. "I will not be defeated by my own joke." Marcus took his fighting stance, wooden sword steady in his hands. "It stopped being a joke the moment you gave me exactly what I needed." Zextar was a different kind of opponent than Marcus had faced so far. Where the others had relied on technological advantages or natural abilities, Zextar was a skilled fighter in his own right. His plasma blades wove deadly patterns through the air, and his footwork showed years of proper training. But Marcus had been preparing for this type of opponent his entire life. Saurians were the galaxy's premier warrior race, and his grandfather's recordings had included extensive analysis of their fighting philosophy. "They fight with honor but also with arrogance," Liu Chen had explained. "They believe that superior skill should triumph through direct confrontation. They will not retreat, will not use tricks or deceptions. This nobility is both their strength and their weakness." Marcus began the fight by giving ground, allowing Zextar to press the attack and establish the rhythm of combat. The Saurian's plasma blades carved glowing trails through the air, each strike powerful enough to cut through starship hull plating. But Marcus wasn't there when the strikes arrived. For 5 minutes, the arena watched as Marcus led Zextar on a deadly dance. The human seemed to anticipate every attack, flowing around the plasma blades like smoke, never quite where Zextar expected him to be. The wooden sword deflected attacks at impossible angles, turning killing strikes into glancing blows. Gradually, Marcus began to see the pattern in Zextar's attacks. The Saurian was skilled, but he was also predictable. His honor demanded that he fight straightforwardly, and his pride prevented him from adapting when his initial strategy failed. Marcus's grandfather had taught him that every warrior had a rhythm, a personal tempo that governed their movements. Find that rhythm, and you could predict their actions. Disrupt it, and you could control the fight. The moment came when Zextar overcommitted to a particularly powerful strike. Marcus stepped inside the attack, his wooden sword tracing a complex pattern that his grandfather had called the willow in the storm. The technique used Zextar's own momentum against him, redirecting the Saurian's energy while placing Marcus in the perfect position for a counter. The wooden sword struck Zextar at the base of his skull, a precise blow that Marcus had practiced 10,000 times. The Saurian crumpled to the arena floor unconscious before he hit the ground. The silence that followed was profound. 60,000 spectators sat in stunned quiet as they processed what they had just witnessed. The human with the wooden sword had defeated one of the Academy's most skilled fighters. Victory to Chen Marcus, the referee announced. Advancement to the final round. As medical teams attended to Zextar, Marcus looked up at the arena's main display. His image appeared alongside that of his final opponent, Korth Blackscale, the undefeated champion. The crowd began to chant, a sound that started low but grew until it shook the entire arena. They weren't cheering for either fighter specifically, but for the unprecedented nature of what was about to happen. For the first time in Academy history, the final match would pit advanced technology against primitive weapons. Galactic experience against human determination. Marcus returned to the preparation area to find it empty, except for Professor Thelnara, who waited with a small smile on her lips. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said, her skin shifting to the warm orange of deep satisfaction. Marcus sat heavily in a nearby chair, exhaustion finally catching up with him. "One more fight." "Yes," Professor Thelnara agreed. "Against an opponent who has never been defeated, using weapons that can cut through anything your sword can block." Marcus looked down at his wooden sword. It showed signs of the day's battles, small nicks and scratches that spoke of its encounters with energy weapons. But it was still whole, still balanced, still ready. "Professor," Marcus said quietly, "what if I can't win?" Professor Thelnara's skin cycled through several colors before settling on the deep purple of wisdom. "Then you will have already achieved something more important than victory," she said. "You will have reminded the galaxy that the spirit of the warrior matters more than the tool they carry. Sometimes that reminder is worth more than any championship." In the distance, Marcus could hear the crowd building to a fever pitch as they prepared for the final match. Soon he would face Korth Blackscale in front of the largest audience in Academy history. Win or lose, the galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. The arena had never seen anything like the atmosphere that preceded the final match. Representatives from every major species in the galactic community filled the stands, while countless billions more watched through holographic broadcasts across the galaxy. What had begun as a curiosity had become the most watched sporting event in recent memory. Marcus stood alone in the preparation chamber, wooden sword across his knees, finding the calm center that his grandfather had taught him to seek before every important moment. Outside, he could hear the roar of the crowd, the commentary of announcers trying to explain the impossible journey that had brought him here. Final competitors. Report to the arena, came the announcement. Marcus rose, wooden sword in hand, and walked toward his destiny. As he emerged into the arena proper, the noise was deafening. 60,000 beings rose to their feet, creating a wall of sound that seemed to have physical weight. Holographic displays showed his image alongside statistics that told an impossible story. 7 victories, 0 defeats, all achieved with a weapon that most of the galaxy considered obsolete. Korth Blackscale waited at the center of the arena, and Marcus felt a chill at the sight of him. The Saurian champion looked even more imposing than during their earlier conversation. His dark scales gleamed under the arena lights, and his twin plasma blades hummed with contained energy that could cut through starship armor. This was no academy cadet or overconfident warrior. This was a killer who had earned his reputation in real combat against real enemies. Admiral Vexthul stepped forward to address the crowd, his ancient voice carrying easily through the arena's acoustic systems. "Citizens of the galaxy," he began, "we witnessed today something unprecedented in the annals of combat sport. A final match between experience and innovation, between proven superiority and impossible determination." The Admiral's gaze moved between the two fighters. "Let it be recorded that both warriors have earned their place here through skill and courage. Whatever the outcome, this day will be remembered as a defining moment in our understanding of what it means to be a warrior." Marcus and Korth approached each other at the arena's center. Up close, the size difference was even more pronounced. The Saurian towered over Marcus by more than 2 feet, his reach advantage overwhelming. But Marcus had faced larger opponents before, and his grandfather's training had taught him that size could be as much a liability as an advantage. "Human," Korth said quietly, his voice audible only to Marcus despite the crowd's noise. "You have fought well to reach this point. You have earned my respect." "Thank you," Marcus replied. "But respect will not stay my hand," Korth continued. "In this arena I am death itself. I have never been defeated, never been seriously challenged. Your wooden sword, skillfully wielded though it may be, cannot stand against weapons forged from pure energy." Marcus looked up into the Saurian's golden eyes and saw something unexpected there. Not arrogance or contempt, but genuine sadness. Korth Blackscale was a warrior who had never met an equal, who had spent years winning battles that were decided before they began. "Champion," Marcus said softly, "what if today was the day you finally had a real fight?" Something flickered in Korth's expression, a spark of possibility that had been absent for years. The referee, the same floating energy being that had overseen every match, positioned itself between them. "Final match of the Academy combat trials," it announced. "Standard rules apply. Victory by submission, incapacitation, or knockout. Combat begins on my signal." Marcus fell into his fighting stance, wooden sword held in the middle guard position that had served him throughout the tournament. Around him, the arena fell silent as 60,000 beings held their breath. "Begin combat," the referee announced. Korth exploded into motion with shocking speed for such a large being. His twin plasma blades carved through the air in a pattern that would have overwhelmed any opponent Marcus had faced so far. But Marcus had been preparing for this moment his entire life. He moved not away from the attack, but into it, his wooden sword tracing a complex defensive pattern that his grandfather had called threading the needle. The technique required absolute precision and timing, using minimal movements to deflect maximum force. The first exchange lasted only seconds, but it established the pattern of the fight. Korth's plasma blades struck again and again, each blow powerful enough to end the match instantly if it connected. But Marcus was never quite where the blades arrived. His wooden sword deflecting strikes at impossible angles, his body flowing like water around the Saurian's attacks. The crowd gasped as they realized what they were witnessing. Not only was Marcus surviving against Korth Blackscale, he was making the legendary champion work harder than anyone had ever seen. For 10 minutes, The arena watched a masterclass in two completely different fighting philosophies. Korth fought with overwhelming power and technical precision, his every move calculated for maximum destructive potential. Marcus fought with fluidity and adaptation, his wooden sword responding to attacks that seemed to come from nowhere with defenses that shouldn't have been possible. But gradually, Marcus began to understand something that changed the entire nature of the fight. Korth Blackscale was not just a skilled warrior. He was an artist, someone who had elevated combat to a form of expression. His plasma blades didn't just cut and thrust. They painted patterns of light through the air that spoke of decades of dedicated practice. And like any artist, Korth had a signature style, a personal rhythm that governed his greatest techniques. Marcus's grandfather had taught him to recognize when an opponent was about to attempt their finishing move. There were tells, subtle changes in breathing and stance that preceded a warrior's ultimate technique. As the fight progressed, Marcus began to see those tells in Korth's movements. The moment came 15 minutes into the battle. Korth's stance shifted almost imperceptibly, his grip on his plasma blades adjusting by mere millimeters. Marcus recognized the preparation for the Saurian's legendary finishing combination, a series of strikes so fast and precise that no opponent had ever survived them. But recognition gave Marcus something that no previous opponent had possessed: the split second of warning he needed to attempt the impossible. As Korth launched into his ultimate attack, Marcus did something that his grandfather had taught him to save for the moment when all else failed. He stopped trying to defend and started trying to create. The wooden sword moved in a pattern that had never been seen before in any arena, a fusion of every technique his grandfather had taught him, combined with insights gained from fighting his way through the tournament. It was part defense, part attack, part artistic expression of everything that made humans unique in the galaxy. Korth's plasma blades encountered not resistance but redirection. Their energy turned back upon itself in a way that the Saurian had never experienced. For the first time in his career, Korth Blackscale found himself off balance, his perfect technique disrupted by an opponent who refused to follow the rules of conventional combat. Marcus's wooden sword slipped past the champion's guard like a whisper, striking with surgical precision at the one spot his grandfather had identified as the weakness in every Saurian warrior's defense: the nerve cluster at the base of the throat that controlled their conscious motor. Functions. Korth Blackscale, undefeated champion of the Academy combat trials, collapsed to the arena floor as his nervous system temporarily shut down from the perfectly placed strike. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. 60,000 beings sat in stunned quiet, unable to process what they had just witnessed. The human with the wooden sword had done the impossible. Then the arena exploded. The roar of the crowd was unlike anything in the Academy's history, a sound of pure disbelief and amazement that shook the station's superstructure. Beings who had come to witness a novelty act had instead seen the birth of a legend. Marcus knelt beside Korth as the Saurian regained consciousness, helping the champion to his feet. Korth's golden eyes held an expression that Marcus had never seen there before: satisfaction. That, Korth said quietly, his voice filled with wonder, was a real fight. Admiral Vexthal stepped forward, his ancient face showing emotions that hadn't been there in decades. "Marcus Chen," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent arena, "Academy combat champion." As Marcus raised his wooden sword above his head, the crowd erupted again. But this time it wasn't just noise. It was recognition. The galaxy had just learned something important about the newest species to join their community. Humans didn't win through superior technology or natural advantages. They won through stubborn determination to find a way when no way existed, through the absolute refusal to accept that something was impossible. The wooden sword, given as a joke to humiliate the primitive human, had become the symbol of something the galaxy had forgotten: that the weapon doesn't make the warrior. The warrior makes the weapon, and sometimes, when the impossible needs to be accomplished, there's no one better suited for the task than a human with nothing to lose and everything to prove. Marcus Chen, Academy combat champion, holder of a wooden sword, had just reminded the galaxy why humanity deserved its place among the stars.